It's a special Thursday edition of the 41 Files. Digital producer Sam Hartle here, joined in the 41 Action News podcast studio by reporter Ariel Rothfield. Hello.
Hello.
And by a man of several hats, Todd Palmer.
Hey, what's up, Sam?
So yesterday, big news in Chiefs Kingdom, across the NFL, when we found out the results of an investigation or a review of an investigation by Johnson County District Attorney Steve Howe. Ariel, there was a news conference yesterday at 3 o'clock. Talk about why he called the news conference and what we learned as it relates to Chiefs star wide receiver Tyreek Hill.
Well, it was a little unusual because typically a district attorney doesn't call a news conference if he or she declines to pursue charges. But District Attorney Howe was so frustrated, and that's why he said he had a news conference yesterday. He said clearly a crime had been committed against a 3-year-old boy.
Yeah, I was going to say, to be clear, there's a child abuse investigation that police had visited the Tyreek Hill's house where he lives with his fiancee, Chris Lespinall, who, by the way, is pregnant with twins. But they had visited twice in March, which is how all this kind of came about.
Right. So we knew about that in mid-March. The first incident was March 5th. The second incident was March 14th.
Well, those are the times that the police investigated. We don't actually know when the alleged abuse took place. We just know when police responded to the house. It's actually believed that the abuse took place as much as a month or even two before March 5th.
So when the police did their investigations on those two incidents, those two cases that we know of, put those reports together on those dates, everything was turned over to the district attorney. And the district attorney could not determine who exactly committed the crime. And he said he was frustrated. Clearly, again, a 3-year-old boy was hurt. But they couldn't prove it. And he kept repeating he would rather let innocent people walk than guilty people walk than put an innocent person away in jail. And that was his whole stance. But I think the reason why he put on a press conference is because he's frustrated. And it almost served as sort of a message, sort of a warning that it's frustrating, it happens, but we don't want it to happen. If you see something, say something, report it.
I thought what was interesting, in addition to the fact that he came out right off the bat and said, "Hey, we're not charging anybody following our review of the incident," but then he went on to speak for about 16 minutes with the caveat, and sometimes this is kind of standard course where you have an official saying, "Hey, I won't be able to answer all of your questions," but he still spoke for 15, 16 minutes about a wide variety of things. One of the things, obviously, the takeaway is, we got some answers yesterday, but this is not the end of the investigation into what happened earlier this year.
No, so put the criminal investigation aside. He confirmed to us that there is a current active investigation with the Kansas Department of Children and Families that is actually looking at the welfare of the little boy. Todd could probably speak about kind of where the little boy is now, what we know of that. But the district attorney was saying that investigation is still ongoing. One reason why he couldn't maybe explain or provide us any more details than he did. And he also left the window open for criminal charges. In Kansas, you can bring criminal charges within 5 years. So
in this particular case, he could come back if there's new evidence.
Right. So no one's out of the woods just yet.
Well, I think that's part of why he did what he did and the timing of it, because I think he's clearly frustrated with the investigation. I think he's clearly believes that at some level there's been some sort of stonewalling. Now, Tyreek Hill's attorneys released a statement today as we talk on Thursday, the day after the attorney, Howe gave his press conference and said he's cooperated. He never invoked his Fifth Amendment right, and so on and so forth. And basically asserted his innocence and said that the welfare of his 3-year-old son, Zev, is his top priority. But I think that part of what Howe's calculation in coming out and being not hiding his frustration at all is the hope that maybe someone who does know something about this case will feel guilty after seeing this and now may come forward. So you're right. This may not be the end for Tyreek Hill.
And something else to note, I was telling Todd about as we were walking in, Tyreek Hill will still have to face questions, presumably from the NFL. And if the DA wanted to subpoena any of that information the NFL gets, anything that Tyreek Hill says to them, they could do that. And that's what could trigger charges.
So what you're saying is basically the NFL could reach a different conclusion than Steve Howe, and they're not constrained by having to prove a criminal case.
Well, yeah. I mean, the NFL is a workplace. I mean, it's a workplace. It's a business. So they don't have the same, burden of proof that you would have, beyond the beyond a reasonable doubt standard. They don't have to worry about admissibility of evidence. And we know for a fact, we know that on March 14th, the day before everything, or I guess it was on March 12th, that the Chiefs, the NFL security team had reached out for information related to this child abuse case. So we know that the NFL and the Chiefs were aware of it, were looking into it, even before it hit the news that Tyreek Hill was at the center of this investigation. And it's not uncommon for the NFL, if you embarrass the shield, to suspend people, even in the absence of charges. It's happened before. I mean, you just look at Kareem Hunt. The Chiefs dismissed him in December. He has not been charged in connection with what happened in Cleveland. I don't think he was charged in connection with punching the man in the face at the resort in Ohio last June either. Wasn't charged in connection with the fight at Mosaic in January 2018. He wasn't charged in any of those incidents that we're aware of, but he's still facing an 8-game suspension from the NFL. So it's entirely possible that even with the absence of charges, even with his attorneys asserting Tyreek Hill's innocence, that he could still be in trouble with the NFL.
One quick question, and I don't know if either of you guys have the answer to this. One of the other things that House said, that because this case involves a minor, that some of the records, maybe if not all of them, will be sealed. Does the NFL? I mean, certainly as a media outlet, we can kick and scream and try to access those records, but if they're sealed, they're sealed. Surely the NFL wouldn't have any greater access to that, right?
Well, we asked Howe about that, if the NFL could get any records, any of the sealed records that we can't get, and he told us absolutely not, that they are held to the same exact standards that other news organizations such as us, such as that we're held to. So unless you know differently, Todd.
Well, I mean,
or maybe his attorneys.
I was going to say, they probably can't formally get any freedom of information, anything more than we could through a Freedom of Information Act, necessarily from the Johnson County District Attorney. But depending on what relationships you have with the attorneys involved in the case, certainly they could allow you to peek at the records. And depending on, what those records say, if you're Tyreek Hill's defense attorney and you've got, presumably you've got whatever the police have through the discovery process, and there is evidence in there that you think strongly exonerates Tyreek Hill or strongly points to the fact that he should not be suspended in this case for whatever reason. I mean, certainly you could allow someone to, you leave the file on your desk. Somebody happens to see it, and so anything like that's possible. I mean, I suppose the same thing could happen if someone with the NFL security team is real good friends with somebody in the Johnson County courthouse too. I mean, all those things are certainly possible, but I don't think that those records are going to see the light of day unless someone has a strategic reason for it.
Sure, I agree.
How's this playing out in the court of public opinion? I know that yesterday, obviously, you're at the courthouse, and so you're not monitoring Twitter, and the other side of it is Twitter is not public opinion. But Todd, in the last 24 hours, what have you seen from Chiefs fans in terms of how they're reacting to the Tyreek, not necessarily getting off, but not having faced his charges yesterday?
Well, I think, look, it's split like almost everything else in this country right now. I mean, on the one hand, when you consider some of the things that, for example, our president says and does, there are some people who say, why, on what planet does it make sense to hold up NFL players as a moral compass for this world? Like, why are we holding them to a higher standard than we would a teacher, a doctor, a lawyer, the president? And so I don't care. He didn't get charged. Shut up and let him play. I think that's a minority opinion right now. I think in the court of public opinion, especially after Steve Howe kind of came out. And look, I felt like his press conference was in some ways a giant middle finger toward Tyreek Hill and toward everyone involved in the investigation who is maybe worried about things other than the safety and welfare of the 3-year-old child. I mean, that's what it felt like to me. The anger, you just don't see anger from a district attorney like that, frustration expressed publicly.
And usually how it's pretty calculated and how he appears in the media.
Correct. I mean, that was, and I think it was a calculated decision. I think it was meant to be emotive, and I think it was meant for him to, I mean, look, the words he chose, that we think a crime has occurred, and we're very frustrated as a father and as a prosecutor that we can't move forward with this case. That wasn't a mistake.
And that came out right at the top. There was
yeah,
that wasn't a follow-up
yeah,
to a
that
reporter
was-
question. That was prepared remarks.
Yeah, no, that was Steve Howe. I mean, he just
His
he
first
just
sentence.
yeah, he decided he was gonna take a hook uppercut right away, and I think he landed both. And so I think for a lot of fans, especially if you have children or a child, which is basically all of us, you got to be a little disgusted by it. And I was talking to my wife about it last night, and I was like, okay, let's say that the Chiefs decide to keep him because there were no charges and he's playing on the team. And let's say late in the fourth quarter, they're down 4 points and Tyreek Hill catches a touchdown to win the Super Bowl next February. I mean,
Are you going to root for him?
are you cheering? I mean, how hard are you cheering for that? And is there a part of you in the back of, is there a piece of you in the back of your mind that still is disgusted by the fact that there's a chance, and again, nothing's been proven, but there's a chance that he was involved in either
He was part of the investigation.
that he was either involved in injuring the child or involved in
Maybe.
covering up injuries to his 3-year-old. And if that's the case, you can't feel that's you feel kind of gross about that.
And another reaction that I've seen, it's not directly tied to the Chiefs, but that the fact people are disgusted, this happens all of the time. This is just one example of somebody in the spotlight that we can show. This happens all the time, but there are hundreds of cases in which police investigate child abuse cases daily, weekly, monthly, and they can't find out who exactly did it. So whoever they suspect just walks away.
Well, and that's one of the interesting things I thought for Howe was,
Right.
I mean, because basically he was kind of taking the adults in this case to town, because at one point he said, like the 3-year-old can't tell us what happened, which means you're relying on the adults involved to be honest with the prosecutors and explain how the injuries to this child took place, or the injuries you believe happened to this child took place. And I think that's where the frustration is that somebody somewhere along the line has decided not to come forward and explain how the child got hurt. And I think, like you said, to your point, I think that happens a lot. Anytime you have a toddler who can't explain to police exactly what happened, if somebody won't come forward and speak on behalf of that child, then the abuser gets away with it.
Ariel, at the end of your shift every night, you kind of have a conversation and you kind of talk with your colleagues about what's next in the story. As a reporter, what are the next things that you are going to be looking for as it relates to reporting of the story?
So I think first and foremost, it's the investigation into their son. I think where that DCF investigation goes is going to be telling if the child is allowed back inside the home. Also, as
Do we know where the child is right now?
No, don't know where the child is. Just we know that he had been removed from the home, and then Howe said that the child is safe.
So we presume that he's still out of the house. But also,
And obviously, Tyreek Hill and Crystal Espinal were in family court last week, dealing with some of the ramifications of the DCF investigation.
Right.
and then as Todd mentioned, Crystal is pregnant with twins. And one of the questions we asked yesterday is what's going to happen to those babies once they're born? Is there going to be a plan in place? Because I think the whole situation, whether you're a Chiefs fan or not, you really are worried and you want to root for the little boy and make sure that he's okay, or those two babies once they're born. And I think as a reporter, it's following the DCF investigation and seeing kind of what plans are in place and what happens to those children.
Ariel, thanks for your great reporting yesterday. We'll certainly stay on tabs with your reporting moving forward. Todd, I wanted to keep you around. Ariel, you're more than welcome to stick around. We just found out.
But she's a Dolphins fan, so I don't know.
Oh.
I mean, if we're going to transition to how this impacts the Chiefs, like, she probably doesn't know much about football, considering Miami hasn't played football in several years.
If you follow Ariel on Twitter on Sunday afternoons in the fall, you know that she knows plenty about football.
Not good football.
She wears the wrong jersey, but while we've been recording, the Chiefs just made the trade official with Frank Clark, the defensive end from the Seattle Seahawks. He's not immune to some of the stuff that we've been talking about. if the Chiefs do make a Super Bowl run, there's that 2-week period where there's a whole bunch of hype. There's a 1-week media period. This issue is now surrounding this Chiefs organization, whether they like it or not. How is this, as an umbrella issue, going to impact this season, do you think?
Well, I don't know that it's going to necessarily impact what the Chiefs do on the field, unless they end up cutting Tyreek Hill or moving on from Tyreek Hill, something along those lines. Yeah, I mean, I don't see it having a big impact. Patrick Mahomes, it's not going to affect his preparation. It's not going to affect how defenses game plan and scheme for them. It's not going to affect how Andy Reid tries to use the pieces that they have. It's not going to affect the installation of Steve Spagnuolo's new defense. And briefly on the Frank Clark thing, first of all, I don't think the Chiefs make the trade if Tyreek was getting charged the next day. Mm-hmm. I'm of the opinion that the Chiefs probably had an idea of what was going to be said Wednesday before they made the trade, and of course it wasn't official. I also think that the Chiefs didn't announce the trade until today because, one, they didn't have to because it's first round of the draft, but now that they make it official, maybe Chiefs headlines on Google search change a little bit from what they were the last 24 hours. Again, I think that could be a calculation.
Real quick, I wonder, and there's only one person that can answer this, and that's Steve Howe, if part of his frustration was how the Chiefs are kind of sort of playing this as it relates to Frank Clark, as it relates to his news conference, as it relates to the investigation.
Well, the thing with Frank Clark is Josina Anderson did a great piece with him last summer because
about the steps, about his life and how he's gotten to this
about his
point.
life and about growing up in a single-parent family with a mother who was a crack addict and living on literally Skid Row in Los Angeles, which, you can find that on Facebook. I believe it's from like July or August 2018. But in it, the woman that he allegedly got into domestic violence assault with during his time at the University of Michigan says he didn't actually touch her. They are actually, Frank Clark and Diamond are actually still together, have a child together. Eerily similar to Tyreek and Crystal in that, because Crystal Espinal, for those who don't know, going back to Tyreek real quick, was the woman that Tyreek allegedly punched in the stomach and choked when she was pregnant with Zev at Oklahoma State University. But you got to remember, the Chiefs have been dealing with these domestic violence-related issues for a long time, really since they drafted Tyreek Hill 3 years ago, because it was a very controversial pick. A lot of teams had taken him completely off the board. The Chiefs decided that his 4.24 40-yard dash was just too good to ignore, and they took him. And by and large, he'd been a good presence in the locker room and a good citizen until at least as far as we know publicly. But they had the Kareem Hunt issue, and then obviously with the trade for Frank Clark, who pled guilty to disorderly conduct, not domestic violence, but still had that arrest on his record. It's clear that the Chiefs don't. If they care, they don't care enough not to bring players in with that in their background or to keep them around, because it's also important to remember the Chiefs knew about the incidents with Kareem Hunt in January 2018, February 2018, and June 2018, and did nothing about it until TMZ released a video and Clark Hunt said, "Hey, you lied to me about what happened last February. You're off the team." But he wasn't kicked off the team because he allegedly struck a woman. That would have happened sooner than, 9 months after the fact. So I think part of that has to do with Andy Reid. You have to remember, Andy Reid's the guy who gave Michael Vick a second chance after Michael Vick was arrested for the dogfighting. Andy Reid's a guy who believes that in giving second chances and believes that he can work with guys in those situations. The problem now becomes, though, when you get burned by it. And if some of the things we're hearing are true, I mean, obviously they felt like they got burned bad enough by Kareem Hunt that they had to let him go. It'll be interesting to see whether they feel the same way about Tyreek.
Right. I think second chances. I think if you're an organization and a person with the character of Clark Hunt and Andy Reid, part of your calculation in second chances is that you're not going to have a 100% success rate. So I think that goes with it. I just think the main issue for the Chiefs is that it's going to be a part of the conversation as the team. It's not like they're an 8-8 team. They're a Super Bowl contender.
Well,
they're going to be on 5 or 6 primetime games. This is going to come up, and it's going to come up frequently.
And And look, if they're playing in the Super Bowl and this is part of the narrative the 2 weeks before that, then they'll be fine with that because they'll be playing in a Super Bowl. And ultimately, that's the goal of the business this year is to win a Super Bowl. So again, if you're looking at the Chiefs to set the moral compass for our country, then we've severely misplaced our values because their job is not to make you necessarily even feel good about cheering for them. Their job is to go win football games. You know, whether they move on from Tyreek or not, whether Tyreek gets suspended or not, you know, I mean, those decisions are going to be made, you know, above my pay grade. But ultimately, the Chiefs are probably going to do what they feel is best within whatever they're comfortable with. Obviously, if you look at the Kareem Hunt situation, they are comfortable with a certain level of violent behavior, even in public. I mean, they put up with a lot from.
Again, he was not charged in any of those instances.
He wasn't charged, but look, they put up with a lot of. I mean, this isn't the first guy they've dealt with. This isn't even the first running back. I mean, Larry Johnson had a lot of alcohol-fueled incidents, and they put up with a lot because Larry Johnson was a good running back in the NFL for a while. I mean, you know, and look, they're not the only NFL team that does this. I mean, you know, there are guys who literally have been convicted of manslaughter who then, you know, or have been on trial for obstruction of justice and murder cases and have come back to the NFL and are celebrated players to this day. You know, so let's not pretend like the Chiefs are, you know, the only organization that has this issue and that has difficulty in how to navigate these kind of waters, because that wouldn't be fair either.
I want to bring back in Ariel real quick. Is there any evidence that at the very least, even if our sports figures and our sports franchises, you know, aren't going to be the bastions of you know, model behavior, is the very least that we can learn lessons of what they're going through and apply them to general public as it relates to having a more robust conversation about domestic violence, about mental health in many respects. Do you see any sense of that?
Yes, to some extent. I think it opens up the conversation. It makes people talk about the issues. I think anytime something happens to a public figure, we see numbers increase. For example, taking it out of football to something a little more girly, when Kate Spade took her life away, we saw a surge in calls to the suicide national hotline. So could this fuel something talking about child abuse and preventing situations from escalating or people calling into a hotline? Possibly, and that's something to keep our eye out.
Todd, real quick, your final, or what's next from a football perspective as it relates to this?
Well, okay, in January 2019, after the AFC Championship game loss, there was probably a 90% chance that this offseason or next, I would even put it at 98% chance this offseason or next, Tyreek Hill got a 5-year deal worth $100 million or more. I would wager to guess that the Chiefs' thinking on that has turned around about 180 degrees. Even if you don't cut Tyreek Hill this year, today, before the season, during the 2019 season, I don't see any way that the Chiefs at this point, given the controversy when he was drafted and given what has happened in the last 6 weeks, I don't see how you could possibly feel comfortable giving him a huge money extension like that and making him one of the highest paid players in the NFL. And so I think that ultimately the Chiefs are going to have to look for another impact wide receiver in this draft or in free agency next year, because I think at some point, I do not think that Tyreek Hill will be on this team past 2019, if he's on this team in 2019 at all.
Todd Palmer, host of the 4th and 1 Chiefs podcast. You guys have, it's a big week for you guys, right?
Yeah, well, we've been doing a lot of draft coverage, so it's been a big 6 weeks for us too, but in a totally different way.
And then you'll have a draft recap podcast coming out on Sunday.
Yeah, and we're gonna have a special guest for that.
You guys made some hints, vaguely veiled, on yesterday's podcast.
Let's just say that if you're an NFL fan, you might be screaming Yahoo when you hear our podcast.
We'll make sure to check that out, Ariel Rothfield. I know that you have to actually go do some reporting tonight, so we appreciate your time for joining us.
Thanks for inviting me.
And we'll see you next week on 41 Files.